I thought I was catching my fiancée cheating. Instead, her lover caught me. Broken nose, 3 stitches. When I got out, I burned their world down. I used to think trust was something you built once and then carried with you, like a foundation under a house. You lay it down, brick by brick, and everything else, the arguments, the stress, the bad weeks, rests on top of it. If the foundation is solid, the house stands. I was wrong. Trust isn't permanent. It's fragile, and sometimes it doesn't crumble slowly, it snaps. The first fracture came quietly. My fiancée had always been a night owl, but her late-night patterns changed. It wasn't just staying up late with a book or watching some show until 2 in the morning. She started leaving the room with her phone pressed to her ear, her voice muffled as if she deliberately kept it low. I would catch fragments when I walked past the kitchen, a laugh too sharp, a whisper that cut off the moment she realized I was near. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. She worked long hours, and maybe these were work calls. But then the excuses started stacking in ways that didn't match her routine. She began mentioning catching up with a friend, but never naming who. Sometimes, she would claim she needed to stay late at the office, only to return smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. The tipping point came one Tuesday night. I had been dozing on the couch, the television droning in the background. I woke to the sound of her phone vibrating on the coffee table. She was in the shower. The screen lit up with a message preview before the lock screen dimmed it again. I didn't catch the whole line, but I saw enough. Last night was worth every risk. Same place tomorrow. My chest tightened. The logical part of my brain told me to wait, to ask her directly, to at least confirm. But a different part, the part that had replayed the whispers, the secret of laughter, the faint smells, overrode it. I knew, or at least, I believed I did. That night, I decided I wasn't going to sit idle. If there was betrayal happening, I wanted to see it with my own eyes. I wanted the truth, raw and undeniable. The following evening, she left after dinner, claiming she needed to drop off some documents for a coworker who had forgotten them at the office. I offered to drive her. It was raining, and I had nothing urgent to do, but she waved me off. Her tone was almost too quick, too rehearsed. I waited 15 minutes before grabbing my coat and heading out. Her car was easy enough to track. I stayed far back, making sure I didn't draw attention. She drove across town, past her usual work route, and eventually stopped in front of an apartment building I didn't recognize. She didn't linger. She slipped out of the car with her bag and hurried inside. My heart pounded so hard it made my vision pulse. Every part of me screamed that this was it. This was the proof I needed. No more shadows or suspicions. I would walk in, see her with him, and have everything laid bare. The building itself was older, the kind with flickering hallway lights and a faint smell of damp carpet. I trailed behind, waiting for the elevator to close before climbing the stairs. The rain had followed me, soaking into my jacket, but I hardly noticed. My focus narrowed to a single goal: expose the truth. I knew which floor she had gone to because I heard her heels clicking faintly as she exited. The sound had stopped near the end of the hallway. By the time I reached it, the corridor was silent, doors lined up like blank faces. Only one door had light spilling faintly from beneath it. I steadied myself. My plan was clumsy but clear: walk in, confront her, and deal with the fallout later. I imagined catching the mid-act, the shock on her face, the silence that would hang before excuses tumbled out. I was braced for betrayal, ready to meet it head-on. What I wasn't braced for was the door opening before I touched it. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes that locked onto mine instantly. I froze. It was as if he had been waiting, listening for me to arrive. His lips curled in a smile that wasn't friendly at all. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of movement, her silhouette vanishing into another room, fast, like a shadow retreating. Looking for someone? His voice was calm, too calm, as if he already knew why I was there. The shock of it stunned me. I had been ready to confront, but I wasn't ready to be confronted. Before I could form a word, he stepped forward, closing the gap between us. The hallway felt narrow, the walls pressing in. I muttered something, an accusation, a demand to see her, but it never left my mouth fully. His fist connected with my face so fast I didn't register the swing. Pain exploded across my nose, white-hot, blinding. I staggered back, hitting the wall, hands clutching instinctively at my face. The next blow came lower, a jab to my ribs that forced the air out of me. I gasped, doubled over, and then felt the sharp edge of his knee slam into my side. The hallway swam in my vision, and all I could think was that this wasn't supposed to happen. I came to catch them. I was supposed to be the one exposing betrayal. Instead, I was being dismantled in silence, with no one coming to help. At some point, I felt the impact of my head against the wall, and then the world tilted. A dull ringing filled my ears. Warm liquid trickled down my face, blood from my nose, pooling at my lips. My eyes watered uncontrollably. I remember her face appearing briefly in the doorway, pale, uncertain, then disappearing just as quickly. No words, no attempt to stop him, no shock, just absence. By the time it ended, I was crumpled on the floor, gasping for air. The man leaned over me, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You shouldn't have come here." Then he straightened, stepped back inside, and shut the door without another word. I lay there for several minutes, disoriented, before forcing myself upright. Blood dripped freely, staining my shirt, my jacket. The walk down the stairs felt endless, each step a wave of pain radiating from my ribs and nose. Outside, the rain had eased, but the cold bit into me, mixing with the throbbing ache in every part of my body. By the time I reached the hospital, the world had blurred into fragments. Waiting room lights, a nurse's hands pressing gauze against my face, the metallic smell of disinfectant mixing with blood. The doctor's voice was detached as he explained. A broken nose, swelling around the eye, 3 stitches for a split above the brow. I nodded numbly, barely hearing. The pain wasn't only physical. It was the humiliation, the realization that I hadn't uncovered betrayal. I had walked straight into a trap. Lying in the hospital bed that night, the events replayed in an endless loop. The smile on his face when he opened the door. The way she vanished into the other room, leaving me alone in the hallway. The precision of his blows, as if he had expected me at that exact moment. It was too neat, too calculated. The thought gnawed at me. They had known. She hadn't been careless. She hadn't been caught off guard. I had. And that changed everything. The first night after the hospital was the hardest. Painkillers dulled the worst of it. But no pill could blur the memory of that door swinging open, the man's grin, or the blows that followed. My nose throbbed under its bandage. Every time I moved, the stitches above my eyebrow tugged. Breathing came shallow because of the bruises along my ribs. But what weighed heavier than the injuries was the silence from her. She knew what happened. She had seen me lying there, bloodied, barely able to stand. And yet no message came through the night. No, "Are you alive?" No call. Not even a pretense of concern. The next morning, my phone buzzed. Not from her, but from one of our mutual friends. The tone was cautious. He said she told people I'd shown up uninvited, acting paranoid, that I was obsessive and out of control. He didn't say it outright, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. The narrative had shifted overnight, and I was already being recast as the unstable one. I tried to explain the texts, the apartment, the man who attacked me, but he responded with a long pause and a polite excuse to hang up. That silence told me everything. My version of events didn't matter anymore. The script had already been written, and she was the one writing it. Over the next few days, the consequences unfolded like falling dominoes. Another friend, someone I had known for years, texted me less sympathetically. "You can't just stalk her. That's dangerous, man." A coworker who usually chatted with me in the break room avoided eye contact. Even her parents, who used to call me every other week, went quiet. The pain in my body was bad, but this isolation stung more. I hadn't realized how quickly perception could be twisted, how fast trust could be weaponized. She didn't even have to defend herself openly. By framing me as unstable, she ensured my injuries became evidence of my own supposed recklessness, not of what really happened. I spent hours replaying everything in my head. The message on her phone, the rain-soaked drive, the door opening before I even touched it, the precision of the blows. This wasn't just cheating. It wasn't even a simple trap. It was coordinated. They expected me. That realization sat like a stone in my chest. If they knew I would come, then they had discussed me, planned for me. Which meant my presence in their world wasn't an inconvenience. It was a problem to be managed. It took a week before I was strong enough to return to work. The bruises had started to fade from purple to yellow, but my nose was still swollen, and the stitches were fresh. People noticed. They always do. I kept my answers vague. Accident. Wrong place, wrong time. But those vague answers did something unexpected. They drew people in. A receptionist leaned closer and whispered, "Looks like more than an accident." A colleague muttered that she'd seen something similar when her cousin owed money. A janitor gave me a sympathetic nod and said, "Careful who you get mixed up with." It wasn't much, but it was the first shift in weeks. Strangers believed something violent had happened. They didn't know the details, but they didn't dismiss me outright. And in those small scraps of acknowledgement, I found a thread to tug on. The next real clue came through the most mundane channel, my bank statement. I was paying bills one evening, cross-checking charges, when I noticed a transfer I hadn't authorized. Not from my account, but to it, a small deposit, tagged as a personal loan repayment. The sender's name meant nothing to me. Curious, I dug deeper, checking past statements. There were more, small, irregular deposits over the past few months. Always from different names. Always labeled in vague terms like repayment or shared expense. I confronted her the next day, not in person, but through a message I knew she couldn't twist. I asked directly, "Who are these people depositing money into our account?" Her reply came fast, defensive. She claimed it was nothing, just reimbursements from friends she had helped out. She accused me of paranoia again, said I was reading too much into everything. But her wording felt rehearsed, too polished for a spontaneous defense. And more importantly, why had she never mentioned lending money in the first place? She wasn't generous like that, not without expecting something back. The trail was faint, but it was there. And if money was involved, the man who broke my nose wasn't just a lover. He was tied to something larger. Recovery gave me time to watch patterns. I noticed how often she left at specific hours, always with vague explanations. Sometimes she came home with nothing. Other times she carried envelopes, sealed and thin. Once, she slipped one into a drawer without realizing I was watching. Later, I checked, it was empty. The detective in me, the side I'd ignored when I thought trust was unshakable, was fully awake now. I stopped expecting confessions. I stopped asking questions she could twist. Instead, I observed. I watched how she flinched when the phone rang after midnight. I noticed how quickly she hit her screen when certain names popped up. And I remembered how the man at the apartment hadn't looked surprised to see me. He had looked ready. Still, suspicion wasn't enough. I needed proof. And the first piece came unexpectedly from someone she thought was irrelevant, her landlord. He showed up at our place one Saturday, knocking on the door while she was out. He looked harried, holding a folder of unpaid notices. He asked if she was around. I said no. Then he sighed and muttered, "Tell her she can't keep stalling. If she and her friend don't cover the rent at that apartment, I'll have no choice but to evict." I froze. Apartment. Her apartment was already paid. This had to be the other place, the one where I was beaten. I pressed him, gently, pretending I was helping. He admitted the rent was months overdue, that he had been lenient because she promised to settle it soon. He grumbled that her partner always showed up with excuses but never cash. In that moment, the financial threads tightened. The apartment wasn't just a hideaway, it was a liability. And liabilities leave trails. That evening, I pieced everything together. She was funneling money, taking small amounts from different people, passing it through vague repayments. The apartment was overdue, yet she still maintained it. The man who beat me wasn't just her secret lover. He was her partner in something messy, something that required keeping people quiet. And then came the cruelest part. She wasn't just protecting him. She was using me to shield him. By framing me as obsessive, she erased any chance that people would believe my side. I had become the scapegoat in their arrangement, the convenient distraction. The realization didn't sink in all at once. It came slowly, piece by piece, until it consumed every quiet moment. The betrayal wasn't just romantic. It was practical, calculated. They had decided I was expendable long before I showed up at that door. The bruises on my face weren't random. They were marks of that decision. So I stopped playing the role they had written for me. If they saw me as unstable, paranoid, easily dismissed, then I would use that mask. I would lean into their underestimation. Because while they thought I was broken and isolated, I was already watching. And I was beginning to see cracks in their carefully staged world. And cracks, if widened, can bring the whole structure down. Time dulls pain, but it sharpens resolve. Within 2 weeks, the bruises on my face had yellowed into fading reminders. The stitches came out. My nose still looked crooked in the mirror, but it no longer hurt with every breath. The outside healed. Inside, the anger calcified into something harder. I no longer cared about proving her affair. That was obvious. The real question was why the performance was so elaborate. Why had the man been waiting for me? Why did she vanish rather than defend me? Why were strangers' names attached to our bank account? Cheating alone didn't explain that. So I began to treat it like a case. Not a heartbreak. A case. The first step was going backward. If people were sending her money, I needed to know who those people were. The bank logs gave me names she assumed I'd ignore. They weren't large sums, 100 here, 200 there, sometimes 3 deposits in a week. Always inconsistent, always vague. I picked one and started searching. Public records are more revealing than people realize. This man lived across town, in a neighborhood where rents were cheap and overdue bills common. A quick look at local court filings showed he had been sued twice by creditors. The timing of his repayments to us matched the periods just after those filings. It wasn't him repaying anything. He was paying her off. But for what? That question drove me further. I called in a favor from someone I barely knew, an acquaintance who worked at a collections agency. I didn't ask for confidential files, just trends. Were there others with this pattern? She confirmed. The names I gave her were all people flagged for missed payments, overdue accounts, or debt disputes. It hit me like a slow dawn. My fiancée wasn't just cheating. She was running something closer to an informal, under-the-table loan business, using desperation as leverage. And the man who broke my nose? He was her enforcer. That realization reframed the beating completely. I wasn't punished for catching them in bed. I was punished for walking into a nest of operations I wasn't supposed to see. My humiliation served two purposes. It silenced me, and it reminded her clients what happened when you got too curious. But if they thought bruises would keep me quiet, they misunderstood the kind of man I am. I started mapping her movements. I didn't use apps or trackers. Those could be discovered. I used old-fashioned observation. When she left, I noted the times. When she returned, I noted what she carried. Twice, I saw her slip envelopes into the drawer again. Once, she returned with a small box and tucked it away under the bed. Late one night, when she fell asleep, I opened it. Inside wasn't jewelry, as I half expected. It was a stack of IOUs, handwritten notes from different people, promising to repay loans with interest. Some were signed. Others were just initials. None had dates, but all looked desperate, rushed. One even mentioned handing over a watch as collateral. I snapped photos of every page. With those photos in hand, I began approaching people, not confrontationally, but gently, as if I were confused and looking for answers. I picked the weakest link first, a man whose IOU was scrawled in shaky handwriting. I found him outside his apartment, smoking, his clothes worn thin. When I showed him the photo, his face went pale. "She told me not to talk," he muttered, almost dropping his cigarette. I pressed just enough. I wasn't here to collect. I wasn't here to threaten. I just wanted to know if it was true. He broke within minutes. Yes, she had loaned him money. Yes, the interest was brutal. Yes, the man who collected sometimes roughed people up. He rubbed his shoulder as if remembering. He begged me not to use his name. That was all I needed. Each conversation after that followed the same pattern. A woman admitted she'd pawned her mother's necklace just to stay ahead of the interest. Another said she had been fired after my fiancé spread rumors about her at work, rumors meant to keep her compliant. A third confessed she'd moved apartments just to avoid the knock on her door at night. Every story carried the same undertone, fear. Not of my fiancé directly, but of the man standing behind her. The one who smiled when he broke my nose. And with each story, my anger sharpened into strategy. They had used me as cover, presenting themselves as a normal couple while bleeding others dry. They assumed no one would question them because anyone who did ended up like me, silenced, discredited, bruised. But my bruises had the opposite effect. When people saw them, they believed me faster. They lowered their guard. Pain became my passport into their trust. Still, suspicion alone wasn't enough. I needed something indisputable, something that would make others see what I now knew. That opportunity came through her workplace. She had always been careful about separating her job from her schemes, or so she thought. But one evening, while she was in the shower, her work email pinged on her laptop. She'd forgotten to log out. The message was from a coworker. Short, clipped, "We can't cover for you anymore. The discrepancies in the reports are being noticed. Fix it before it blows up." My pulse quickened. Discrepancies. Cover-ups. I scrolled, heart racing. Several emails hinted at adjustments in financial records, manipulated spreadsheets, and unexplained withdrawals. She wasn't just preying on desperate neighbors. She was siphoning from her employer, too. And if the company was starting to notice, her carefully stacked house of cards was about to sway. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Confrontation only gave her the chance to twist the narrative again. Instead, I quietly gathered screenshots of emails, photos of IOUs, notes from conversations with her clients, a timeline of deposits into our account. I created a folder, encrypted and backed up. I labeled it simply, Truth. But truth alone wasn't enough. Truth had to be placed where it hurt. The turning point came the night she left for another late meeting. I followed again, not directly, but enough to track her destination. It wasn't the apartment this time. It was a dimly lit bar on the edge of town, the kind that caters to people who don't want questions asked. Through the cracked blinds, I watched her sit across from two men I didn't recognize. One slid a folder across the table. She leafed through it quickly, then nodded. The man leaned in, his expression tense. She laughed, too loudly, too forced. Then he placed something on the table that froze me, a wad of passports. I stayed until they left separately. I didn't follow the men. My focus was on her. When she returned home, she acted casual, humming in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine as if nothing unusual had happened. But I had seen it. Passports. IOUs. Debt. Enforcers. This wasn't romance. This was crime. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, piecing everything together. The affair was real, yes, but it was only the surface. The real betrayal was deeper. She and her lover weren't bound by love, but by profit. Together, they had built a parasitic system, feeding off the desperate, hiding behind false smiles. And when I got too close, they turned me into the convenient madman. Unstable, jealous, violent. I almost laughed at the irony. They thought breaking my nose ended my usefulness. They didn't realize it had turned me into their most dangerous problem. Because now, I didn't just want revenge. I wanted collapse. And collapse doesn't come from fists or shouting. It comes from threads pulled, slowly, until the whole tapestry unravels. So I pulled the first thread. I met with the coworker who had emailed her. It wasn't hard. I found her name in the CC field of another message. I approached her casually, off company grounds, with enough evidence in hand to show I wasn't bluffing. Her eyes widened at the photos of IOUs, the emails, the bruises that hadn't fully faded. She didn't confirm everything, but she didn't deny it either. She muttered that people have been suspicious for months. She warned me not to get involved, that it was bigger than I thought. I smiled, for the first time in weeks. Because she was right. It was bigger than I thought. And that meant when it fell, the sound would echo. The folder I'd built, Truth, was no longer just a collection of files. It was a weapon. Every screenshot, every IOU, every email became a brick in the arsenal. But weapons are useless without precision. I wasn't interested in reckless exposure. If I moved too soon, she'd paint me as bitter, violent, unhinged. I needed to let their own network choke them. So I chose pressure points. The first target was her employer. I packaged the evidence. Emails showing discrepancies, time-stamped photos of her late-night meetings, even a snippet of her conversations with the men at the bar. I sent it not to HR, but directly to the company's compliance department. I knew enough about corporate structures to understand one thing. Compliance fears scandal more than anything else. I didn't attach my name. I created a burner account and signed it only. Concerned. 2 days later, she came home tense, snapping at everything. She claimed the office was reviewing procedures. I said nothing. The cracks were spreading. The second target was financial. The people she preyed on had always been isolated, ashamed. But victims gain courage when they realize they aren't alone. I started reaching out, carefully, to the ones I had spoken with. I showed them the photos of the IOUs, the proof that others had been exploited the same way. One by one, they began to talk to each other. Fear turned into anger. Some wanted payback. Others just wanted their lives back. Within a week, they formed a loose group. A chorus of voices instead of whispers. And once they realized how many of them there were, silence was no longer an option. The third pressure point was her family. Families believe what they want to believe, until they're shown proof. I mailed an envelope to her parents' house. Inside, copies of IOUs, bank transfers, and a photo of me taken at the hospital, stitched and swollen. No letter. No explanation. Just evidence. Let them connect the dots themselves. The call came 3 days later. Her father's voice was shaky, angrier than I'd ever heard it. He asked if it was true. I said only this. I tried to protect her. She chose him. Then I hung up. I knew that silence would gnaw at them worse than any speech. But the final strike, the one that would unravel everything, came from the man himself. The one who had smiled when he broke my nose. He wasn't invincible. He was sloppy. People who rely on intimidation always are. They think fear erases memory, but victims remember details. One of the debtors I spoke to recalled his car, a black sedan with a dent in the rear bumper. Another remembered his habit of wearing the same leather jacket. A third whispered that he sometimes bragged about connections, but always in vague, half-drunk boasts. I followed those crumbs until I found his name tied to small claims, unpaid fines, even a dismissed assault charge. He wasn't just a lover or an enforcer. He was a liability walking on borrowed time. And liabilities can be exploited. I compiled everything into a final dossier. The fraudulent loans, the workplace theft, the network of victims, his past charges, my hospital records. I sent it to 3 places at once. The company, the police, and an investigative journalist I knew wouldn't ignore a scandal with human faces. Then I waited. The collapse didn't come like thunder. It came like an avalanche, slow at first, then unstoppable. Her company suspended her pending investigation. Rumors spread, whispers in hallways turning into meetings behind closed doors. She tried to downplay it, but the evidence spoke louder. The victims, now organized, filed complaints together. Their stories aligned, their fear replaced by collective fury. The police could no longer dismiss them as isolated cases. Her parents cut contact entirely. I knew because she screamed about it on the phone, pacing the kitchen while I sat silently in the next room. And the man? He was picked up one night on unrelated charges. But once he was in the system, the rest unfolded quickly. Old debts resurfaced. Victims identified him. My hospital report tied his violence to their extortion. For the first time, his grin was gone. She tried to fight back. She claimed I had forged documents, manipulated accounts, turned people against her. But her words held no weight anymore. Too many threads pointed in the same direction. Too many voices carried the same story. The apartment was seized. Her accounts were frozen. She lost her job, her reputation, her allies. The people she had used for years finally saw her for what she was, and none of them offered shelter. She was left with nothing but the wreckage she created. And me? I didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no triumph. Revenge doesn't feel like a victory parade. It feels like silence after a storm. But there was satisfaction. Satisfaction in knowing the man who broke my nose was behind bars, facing charges that went far beyond me. Satisfaction in seeing her lies collapse under their own weight. Satisfaction in watching victims finally breathe without fear. I bore scars, both visible and invisible, but I also carried clarity. I had been cast as the obsessive, the unstable one. In the end, I was the only one who saw the truth clearly enough to act. And when the world finally burned around them, I walked away untouched. The house of trust one once believed in was gone. But in its place stood something better. Proof that betrayal, no matter how carefully staged, can never outrun consequences. And I was the one who made sure those consequences arrived. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.